My name's Keith Gideon. This is a continuing education class on who, what, where, when, why, and how of survival in real estate. Yes, I know what you're thinking. I don't want to just survive, I want to thrive. Well, the first thing you need to do is you need to get your life in order, doing the right things at the right time, and then you won't have to worry so much about it. Where do we start? The obvious place that we're going to start is the disclosures that you need to make about the condition of the property. Oh, there are some bad properties out there, and you may be getting the opportunity to list some of those properties. You're not a construction expert. You don't know everything that's wrong with that property, but at least you'll be able to point out some things. Now, some agents, they don't even bother about the disclosure. They just let the seller's disclosure take care of all of it. But that may not be a good idea. I have had a lot of listings in the past in which it was an incomplete house. In my area, people go out, they buy some acreage, they have a couple of cases of beer, they got a couple of buddies, and they start building a house. They don't know what they're doing, and when they run out of beer, they quit building the house. And eventually they list it with me. There's a lot of people that would be happy to finish those houses and sell them for a profit. I walked into one house with a husband and wife that had finished out many houses together. And when we got inside the living room, it had been framed in, but not sheetrocked or paneled. And the husband went, "Look at that." And I went, "What?" He says, "Over the door." I went, "What?" He says, "That's not the way that's supposed to be done." To this day, I don't know what I was looking at, because I don't know how they're supposed to frame over a door. But now I knew that there was something wrong with that property. The next set of buyers I took out there, I walked into that room and I went, "Look at that." They went, "What?" I said, "Over the door." And they went, "What?" I said, "I don't know, but if you're concerned about it, let's get an expert out here to tell you what it'll take to get it fixed." I use that line a lot. I used to have a listing down at the lake, and I would walk along the front yard with the buyers, and I would get to one spot and point at the tunnels in the wood. And I would say, "You see that? That's termites or carpenter ants or something. If you're concerned about it, let's get an expert out here to tell you what it'll take to get it fixed." The seller was home one day. He heard me give that speech. He called me that afternoon. He says, "Why are you doing that?" I said, "We have to disclose those insects are there, or we're all going to wind up in a courtroom someday." The next time I went to show that house, there was fresh boards and paint over that spot. And I walked up to it and I said, "You see that spot there? It had termites or carpenter ants. If you're concerned about it, let's get an expert out here to tell you what it'll take to get it fixed." The seller called me again. "What are you doing now?" I said, "Did you treat the ground?" "No." "Did you change out the studs?" "No." "Then all you did was put a fresh meal up for those insects." I never did get that property under contract. When it came to the end of the listing period, I didn't even ask for an extension at that point. Why is it so important to disclose to people the condition of the property? It's because the pendulum has swung to the other end. Many of you, when you got into real estate, buyer agency didn't exist. Nobody worried about the buyer. Nobody disclosed anything to the buyer. They were on their own. It's that old phrase from Latin, caveat emptor, let the buyer beware. But now we're at the other end of the spectrum, in which now we make the buyer aware of everything that we know about that's wrong with the property. We may not know everything since we're not construction experts. What can we do? Oh, here's a suggestion. How about getting a home inspection on the property so now the buyer can be as fully informed as possible? Obviously, the home inspector might find something else that is wrong with the property that might even require a structural engineer to come out. There's nothing wrong with that either. We want this buyer to be as fully informed as possible before they purchase this property. Why is this so important that we're talking about disclosures about the condition of the property? Some statistics say that 2/3 of lawsuits are about fraud, misrepresentation, or negligence. Now, I don't know how accurate those statistics are, but if it is, I'm wondering what the other 1/3 is about then. Another piece of statistics says that approximately 25% of all the brokers are sued each year. Luckily, I've never been one of those brokers. I've been threatened 3 times, but the lawsuits have never been filed. So it is nice to know I've fallen into that category. Do you have one of those little old cranky people in your office? The one that comes up to the new agent in the office and says to them, "There's two kinds of real estate agents, those that have been sued and those that are about to be sued." Why these people are so angry and stay in real estate is beyond my comprehension. When they say that to me, I usually mess with them a little bit and say, "Well, which one are you?" They're always one of them that has already been sued. Well, we have looked at some statistics, the 2/3 and the 25%. Mark Twain had something to say about statistics. Heck, Mark Twain had something to say about everything. He said there are lies, damn lies, and statistics. I was talking to my youngest son on the phone one day, and I was also quoting him something about statistics. And he said to me, 80% of statistics are made up most of the time. And I said, "Where did you get that statistic?" He says, "I made it up." So you can only rely on statistics so much, and then they won't get you very far. Now, the wonder is that we don't get into more trouble than we do, because bad things can happen to us as real estate licensees. One of the things that can happen is we can be sued for actual damages. That means that somebody can sue us because we gave them bad advice, bad information, bad opinion, and then they can sue us for the money that they were out. Usually when they sue us over misrepresentation. They have to prove we did something and that that they were damaged by it, and then the judge has to agree with them, and we may have to pay actual damages. They even sue us for punitive damages. Now, the key to this one is they have to sue us for fraud rather than misrepresentation. And they have to prove that we intentionally did something. It is hard to prove that we intentionally did something, so people usually sue us under misrepresentation rather than fraud. Now, when it comes to punitive damages in Texas, it can go to as much as 3 times of the actual damages. That gets pretty darn expensive before this is all over with. Now, let's talk something that might be a little bit more simple and not quite as painful as that. If we get ourselves into a situation in a transaction, the buyer may decide they do not want the property anymore, and they may go to an attorney and try to rescind the transaction. In that case, the worst thing that's going to happen to you is you're going to have to give back your commission, and you've already spent it. But of course, after they rescind the transaction, they may think about filing a complaint or a court case after that as well. There's no reason why we should go through that if we don't absolutely have to. There's a wonderful question you ought to ask every buyer before you get under contract. It goes this way: is there something you want to do with the property other than simply live there? When they say yes, find out what it is. And then let them decide whether they can do it or not. Don't decide for them. There have been lots of transactions that have been rescinded because that question was not asked. And when the buyers got into the property, they wanted to do something that either zoning or deed restrictions wouldn't allow. Some people have bought houses, wanted to open up a daycare center in there, found out they were not allowed to do that. They wanted to end the transaction so that they could go buy something where they could do that, and the real estate agent wound up giving back their commission. Why don't we just deal with that up front? Ask the question, is there something you want to do with the property other than simply live there? I asked that question once of a couple of buyers. Well, we want to raise emus. Are emus allowed? I said, I don't know. Let's check. I handed them a copy of the deed restrictions for the area. And as they read through, they said, well, livestock is allowed. Are emus livestock? I said, I don't know. Here's the phone number for the county extension agent. Ask him. When they called him and asked him, are emus considered livestock? He says, I don't answer questions of that nature. You need to hire an attorney to represent you. They hired an attorney. He said, emus are livestock. Go ahead and buy the property. We closed on it 7 years ago. I drive by that property from time to time. I haven't yet seen an emu out there. They're either changed their mind or they're raising them inside the house, one or the other. But to see how I didn't tell them, oh yeah, emus are livestock, I'm not going to make up an answer. I'm going to see to it that they find out the answer some other way instead. Obviously, another bad thing that can happen to us as real estate agents is we can have our license suspended, revoked, or fined, and all the other nasty things that the Real Estate Commission can do to us. There is nothing fun about going through the process, and I have been through that process. I was cleared of any wrongdoing, but it was still a painful experience just the same. If that's not enough, somebody can also file a complaint at the local board, and the board may decide to discipline you. Now, you need to understand this. Somebody can file a complaint at the board. They can also file a complaint at TREC, and they can also file a lawsuit if they want to do that. Some of you are saying, well, isn't that double jeopardy? No, it's not. It is two separate administrative acts and then a court case. Some people thought it was double jeopardy when O.J. had a criminal case and a civil case, but it was not. You cannot be tried for the same thing in another criminal court, but there could be a civil case that could come after that. Oh, those bad things could get us into so much trouble that we just don't even want to think about those things. So let's spend some time figuring out what we can avoid doing so that we won't put our license in jeopardy. One of the things that we could do wrong is misrepresentation. I lived out in the country, and we had a pier and beam foundation. For this house had been added onto so many times, the air conditioning ductwork was in the floor instead of in the ceiling. And one of my boys heard a noise in his bedroom one day, and he looked down in the air conditioning register, and there was a possum looking back up at him. In the other bedroom, my other boy was in there one night. He heard a noise. He looked over there, and our cat was pushing the register up and coming back into the house. Obviously, there's a hole in the ductwork somewhere under there. Well, I came home from work one day, and the master bedroom was real hot. The rest of the house was cool, and I looked down in the air conditioning register. The ductwork had been pulled loose. It was laying on the ground. Now, I have a simple philosophy in life. I don't go under houses. I'm too fat to be there, and I may be sharing that space with critters. So I hired a young guy, then a skinny guy to go under my house. He got under the house just in time to watch a skunk walk across the ground and go into the ductwork that had been pulled loose. He crawled over there. He tied off one end. Then he went to the other end, tied it off, and dragged it out from under the house. He had it laying in the yard, and he's scratching his head going, what am I going to do with this skunk that I just caught? My neighbor came over and said, I'll take care of it for you. He went into the house, and he got out his .22, and he kept shooting the ductwork till he hit the skunk. Oh, when I came home, my yard smelled awful. I called my wife and told her what happened. She went on the internet and she found a website that said throw mothballs under your house and you won't have to worry about skunks being there anymore. She came home with a case full of mothballs. I threw them all under the house. The inside of the house smelled worse than the yard did after I did that. Well, I've sold that house out in the country now, and I live in the city. I've got a privacy fence. I'm not going to have to worry about deer eating my things anymore. And the first thing I did was put in some cherry tomato plants. Oh, I like growing my cherry tomatoes. I walked through the living room one night just in time for the motion detector to kick on the patio, and there was a mama and baby skunk out there chewing on my tomatoes. I thought, well, I'm not going to throw mothballs out there. Let's go on the internet and find out what other websites say about how to get rid of skunks. I found one website that said what you need to do to keep skunks away is urinate all over your yard. I decided my neighbors wouldn't appreciate it if they caught me doing that kind of thing. I found another website that said, well, put a pan of antifreeze out there. They'll drink it and die. And I thought, well, that's a heck of a way to go. I'm not doing that to them. And I finally found a website that said, put some X-Lax out there. They'll eat the X-Lax. They'll lose control of themselves in the place where they live, and they won't want to live there anymore, and they'll move somewhere else. That night, there was a pie pan full of X-Lax in the backyard. It was all gone the next morning. I haven't seen a skunk since. That must have given them a run for their money like you wouldn't believe. Now, when I sold that property out in the country, I made sure and told the buyers, you may have animals under the house occasionally. I'm sure glad I did. The lady called me the first day she owned the property. She says, you told me about those animals. I said, yes, I did.